falling into what Kevin Allison called the Thucydides Trap. So this idea that if you have a global hegemon, a status quo power who's dominant, is challenged by a quickly rising nation, the risk of war is very high. So it goes back to, of course, the wars between Athens and Sparta in classical Greece, where, in the first page, it's a great book actually, and he has this very key, immediate observation right at the first page of his book. He's saying it was the rise of Athens and the fear in Sparta it triggered that made war inevitable. That's a quote from this first page, and it basically, that's in a nutshell, it's the rise of one nation, but it's also the fear that it triggers in dominant power that leads to a high risk of war. And I think this is the situation that we're in right now. The question is it inevitable, or is there a way of actually manage the rise of China without, starting World War III? And I think that's the challenge of our time, and how to find a way to make it work.
I mean, it was also similar with Germany in the First World War. It was the Great Britain was the major power. Then you had Germany, a rising industrial power that wanted to militarize, who wanted to come to the table and say, I also want my piece of the cake in this whole imperialistic world. And that created all of the tensions. And then you had the First World War, where everyone wanted to test who had the best warfare technology.
Exactly. There's a lot of, let's say, a new nuance to looking at the outbreak of the First World War, like with new research coming out, book Sleepwalkers, very important there. I think arguably you could argue there was some truth to what, the German policymakers actually thought, what's this all about? There's a British Empire and we're not supposed to grow anymore. Why? I mean, what's the normative reason for just, you've been here first. Yes. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't grow anymore. So we want to claim our share.
Yeah.
And it led to a catastrophic outcome.
Yeah.
Right. We basically destroyed Europe, and you could argue that the whole 20th century was basically a nightmare triggered by what happened in 1914. Now, question now is, what can we learn from 1914 episode in order to avoid similar mistakes today? And Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, has written a great book about the rise of China, and he basically says we need to distinguish 3 levels in the relationship between the US and China. One is about red lines. There are parts that are really where we have overlapping interests, they conflict, and we need to manage them very, very carefully. These are the hot topics like Taiwan, status, independence of Taiwan. This is one bucket. The second bucket is basically economic competition. So, right, the full blown out, we want to be best in AI, and, we claim the market and we grow companies and et cetera. That's basically competition between great powers. That's the second bucket. And the third bucket is global cooperation. Because, the planet is burning, right? We have global issues like climate change. We have global pandemics, and we need to cooperate at some level for the sake of humanity, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a very odd timing for waging a great power competition when actually the planet is burning and we cannot cooperate on anything anymore. That's a real problem. So how do we make sure that we can separate all 3 levels and be able to compete, be able to manage our red lines to avoid a hot conflict, as well as cooperate on global issues where we have mutual, interests and benefits of actually doing so? And I think we're still far from actually having an idea on how to do all 3 things at the same time without, blowing up the planet. And this is, I think, the major challenge we're facing right now. And the problem that I see, and this was when I spent, a couple of months in DC to write the book, I was a little bit disappointed how few thoughts are actually spent on coming up with an idea of how we could actually live together and do all 3 things, rather than focusing on, very tactical engagements with like how can we optimize export controls and how can we, get Huawei out of our networks, etc. These are very tactical questions. But the bigger question is, what do we actually want from China? What do we really want China to do? Other than, not being there is not an option. China is, you need to deal with China, and you need to acknowledge that, China will not go away. So what do you actually want to propose to China that is acceptable to them, but also serves our interest?